Yes, my name is Åsa Fahlén, and I'm the president of the National Union of Teachers in Sweden. And I'm an upper secondary school teacher. I teach civics and history. But since 5 years ago, I'm now the president of our union. And I'm going to talk about gender balance in the education system. And of course, since I'm Swedish, it's going to be mainly a Swedish perspective. But I'm also going to do a bit of comparison outside of Sweden as well. I'm going to talk about 5 different chapters here. What does it look like? Who is a teacher today? Reasons for imbalance, what has been done and what should be done. What are the consequences? Is there a need for more male teachers? Perhaps a bit of a spoiler, but I think you perhaps suspected that. Gender gaps in education, and then finally conclusion and some key messages. So first of all, what does it look like? Who is a teacher these days? And the answer is most likely a woman. This regardless whether we are in Sweden or in any other European country or outside in the world. In Sweden, 75% of the teachers are women, and the gender balance has nearly been unchanged throughout the 21st century. During the 1980s, when the teacher profession had a higher status, the number of male teachers was temporarily higher, amounting to just over a third of the total teaching staff. However, women have always, since the early 20th century, been the majority in the profession. The proportion of female teachers tends to increase the younger the children are. In the preschool class, 93% of the teachers are women, while the share of female teachers in compulsory school is 74%, and in upper secondary school, 52%. In the upper secondary schools, there are, however, big differences between the school subjects. Almost all the language teachers are women, while male teachers dominate in technology, physics, maths, chemistry, sports, and health, as well as in music. If we compare Sweden to the rest of Europe, we see that we are in no way unique in this context. In all EU member states, teachers are predominantly female. The average share of women in EU's teaching workforce is 72%. According to Eurostats, the share of female teachers seems to be the highest in Latvia, 87%, Lithuania, 85%, followed by Estonia, 83%. In contrast, the share of male teachers is the highest in Denmark, in Luxembourg, with 35%. An interesting thing to note in this context is that Denmark has the highest teacher salaries of all the Nordic countries, and Luxembourg in the whole of Europe. Perhaps some conclusions can be drawn here. In Sweden, the problem is not only that men lack interest in becoming teachers in primary and lower secondary school, but the problem is also that too many of those teaching today don't have a teacher's degree. As many of you probably know, there is a huge shortage of teachers in Sweden. During the past 30 years, we have not had a lower proportion of qualified teachers in Swedish schools than we have today. Last year, only 70% of the teachers in lower secondary school had a teacher's degree, compared to the peak in 1993, where we had 93%. The gender gap has widened. In 1999, 89% of women and 80% of men had a teaching degree. The corresponding figure for 2019 were 82% and 66%, respectively. If we only look at newly hired primary school teachers last year, only 35% of them had a teacher's degree. Of the newly hired women, 40% had a degree, and of the newly hired men, only 22% were qualified. And that, of course, is a real problem, and I will come back to that later. Gender balance of the students in teacher education, of course, reflects this reality. Female students have for a long time been in the clear majority in teacher education, even though the gender balance looks different in different programs. Since the current degrees were introduced in Sweden in 2011, more than 90% of the students in preschool teacher education programs have been women. The gender balance among the students in subject teacher education programs for upper secondary school, on the other hand, has been even. There are quite a large amount of dropouts from teacher education in Sweden, and the largest amount of dropouts are among the male students. Over 35% of students leave the teacher training for secondary school years that is grade 7 to 9. And this can be compared with, for example, medical education, where the dropout rate is only 8%. The most remarkable thing, however, is that as many as 41% of the male students in the subject teacher education for grade 7 to 9 drop out early. The dropout rate cannot only be explained by the fact that women have higher high school grades, but there are obviously also other things that makes a difference. The reason why the male students' dropout rate is so high has unfortunately not been studied enough. So that's something for us to do. The interesting thing is that the gender distribution regarding dropouts is not the same the other way around. I mean that in the male-dominated educations, for example, engineering, women do not drop out to a greater extent than the male students do. Maybe there has been an awareness of the importance that more women should and can complete engineering education, and that higher education institutions have made an effort in relation to female students. Perhaps those responsible for women-dominated education, such as teacher education, can learn something from this and make similar efforts to get the male students to stay. So the reasons for imbalance, what has been done and what should be done. Many voices have been raised over the past decades in order to attract more male teachers. The Swedish government has given universities various assignments to broaden the recruitment to get more male students to choose to become teachers, and various projects have been run. Unfortunately, they have not given the desired result. Several higher education institutions have had special men in school projects, but they have now been shut down. They were also considered conflicting with the intention of the Equal Treatment Act in Sweden. The problem and the biggest concern today is that we need more teachers, both male and female. By the year 2033, Sweden will have an estimated shortage of approximately 45,000 qualified teachers. And at the same time, more than 20,000 people who actually work today as unqualified teachers, they need to get further education to achieve a degree, which sums up that we can to a total lack of 65,000 teachers in 2033. Dropouts are not just a problem during the teacher training. Many qualified teachers choose to leave the profession. During the last 20 years, more people have left the teaching profession than any other profession in Sweden. And here we have the same trend, unfortunately. Those who leave are more often men. 15% of qualified teachers, which is 35,000, today work with something else than what they are trained for. While the corresponding figure, for example, police officers and nurses, is only 8%. So there is a bigger amount of teachers who actually leave the profession. So in Sweden, we really need to do more to increase the status and attractiveness of the teaching profession so that more people, both men and women, want to become teachers and that they also want to stay in the profession. The underlying factors that discourage both men and women from the profession needs to be addressed. This means, above all, that wages need to be raised and the heavy workload reduced. Although teacher salaries in Sweden have had a slightly positive development since 2012, in comparison with other academic educations, teacher degree is still the least valued in the labor market. Half of the teacher education programs are for the individual purely a financial loss from a living wage perspective. In my opinion, it's only with a higher appreciation of the teaching profession that we can also expect more men to want to become teachers. It is also important to increase the quality of teacher education so that dropping out is prevented and more male teacher students also complete their education and actually achieve a degree. I would also say that the mentoring program for new teachers providing support and coaching, which has been successful in many other countries, is an important component into the introduction of new teachers into the profession and for keeping new teachers. But not many schools or municipalities use mentoring programs in Sweden or provide mentors for the first-year teachers. This is something that Swedish decision makers needs to look at and to develop. Do male teachers get more salary, get more paid than female teachers? Not in Sweden. Until now, I've only talked about the gender balance, but I also want to mention some words about the gender equality, because this is actually fair in the Swedish education system. Wage differences between male and female teachers have almost completely disappeared. Previous research suggests that this may be an effect of the system with individually performance-based salary instead of what we used to have, a more tariff-based system. However, the analysis cannot exclude that this can also be a result of something else. For example, an increased social awareness of gender equality issues. This can be compared with other academic degrees where female academics have lower wages than males in many areas. On average, there is a difference of almost 3.7 million crowns, and the biggest difference is 4 million is between male and female economists. So what are the consequences, and is there a need for more male teachers? None and no. If you are to believe in studies which indicate that the teacher's gender has no direct effect on the student outcomes, at least not in Sweden. According to the study of the National Agency for Education called Gender Differences in Goal Fulfillment from 2006, no evidence is found for the fact that girls outperform boys is due to gender imbalance. The National Agency for Education writes, the results do not support the hypothesis that the teacher's gender would affect the gender differences in outcomes and goal fulfillments. The same report shows, however, that boys in 9th grade, to a greater extent, rate male teachers as good teachers. They describe that male teachers have a greater ability to engage them and to create interest. Boys also state that they listen more to male than to female teachers. Girls, on the other hand, do not express any differences between female and male teachers in the assessment of which teachers are good teachers. Male teachers matter if we consider the school's mission as a whole. The school must be gender neutral and work for gender equality. If we are to build gender-equal countries, school is fundamental. School is the place where the values of the society are built and where we can strengthen or weaken society's gender norms. School must in every way actively work to encourage students to develop their interests without prejudice about what is feminine or what is masculine. When the visibility of male teachers is limited, it perpetuates the view that teaching is a job better suited for women. For the school to be able to stand as a model for the values we convey, we need a more even gender distribution among teachers at all stages. This would facilitate the school's mission of gender equality. A male teacher can also have a crucial role as a positive and reassuring male role model for some children and students from more disadvantaged backgrounds, and may promote feelings of school belonging and reduce disruptive behavior such as criminality. In Sweden, as in many other countries, of course, Gang criminality and street gang violence are growing concerns. And we talk a lot about what schools can do to help prevent this. For pupils at compulsory school, teachers are likely to represent the most important authority figure they come into contact with outside of home. Research shows that boys can benefit from having male role models in the school environment. So gender gaps in education. And finally now I want to address the problem with gender gaps. How boys and girls succeed in school and their achievements and outcomes today are crucial to how men and women in the future will be able to contribute to the labor market. This also has importance if we want to get more male teachers in the future. We know already today that there are more young women than men who choose to or are able to continue studying in higher education. A permanent and growing gender gap can in the long run have serious consequences. If this will increase the gender imbalance in schools even more in the future is, of course, a highly relevant question. According to Swedish Education Act, the school is supposed to be equal for everyone, regardless of background or gender or where you live. But this is not reflected in reality. Differences between boys and girls' results are large and they are growing. According to statistics of the Swedish National Agency for Education last year, girls had higher grades in all subjects when they left the compulsory school, which is 9th grade in Sweden. There are more boys whose grades are not good enough to study further in the upper secondary school, and there are also more boys dropping out from upper secondary. Those who do not achieve the upper secondary school diploma risk ending up in long-term exclusion and unemployment. Every third boy in Sweden's so-called vulnerable areas, a term applied by the police in Sweden to areas with high crime rate and social exclusion, they will fail their studies. So what is the reasons for this? As I told you before, the lack of male teachers have no direct effect on students' outcome. But according to studies, there is some evidence that the transition from traditional teacher-centered teaching to more independent learning methods may have suited girls better. Boys are not worse at learning, but they seem to need more control, discipline, and clear tasks, as well as clear expectations. Not the least, the norms around masculinity affect boys' results. Among boys, there can be a wide anti-study culture, where a boy who studies risks getting a lower status. Studying is seen as feminine, and by distancing from it, boys prove their masculinity. And this, of course, has negative effects on the results. In this context, we can raise the question of whether the presence of more male teachers could make a difference. Above all, we need to do more to increase equality and quality of our education system to fight the inequality. All children and students must have access to the same high-quality standards of education. That means in Sweden that we need more qualified teachers with teacher certificates, schools with more challenges need more resources, and teachers need reasonable working conditions. This is crucial for the education system to be able to compensate for different backgrounds, socioeconomic disadvantages, and for gender. So, some conclusions and key messages. First, the teaching profession, neither in Sweden nor globally, reflects a diversity in society. Preserving and pursuing a gender balance in education now and into the future is ultimately in the best interest of all school stakeholders. Advocating for more males to train to become qualified teachers and raising awareness about the importance of positive role models is important for building inclusive classrooms and for the school's mission to promote gender equality. The underlying factor that discourages both men and women from the profession needs to be addressed, including high workloads and low salaries, lack of support, and the unjustifiably low status with which teaching is typically held. The dropout rate from teacher education, which is high among male students, could possibly be reduced by developing and increasing the quality of the teacher education. Additionally, sometimes a degree is not enough to prepare new teachers for the challenges both inside and outside of the classroom. Here we need more mentoring programs to support new teachers. It is also crucial to prevent gender gaps in student outcomes, since it has an impact on the outcome of the labor market. The number of women has increased in higher education and in all professions that require some form of higher education, while men's contribution to a less gender segregated labor market, on the other hand, remains insignificant. Preventing the gender gap could influence the gender balance in the education system in the future and increase the share of male teachers. And finally, several measures must be taken to achieve a more equal school system that makes it possible for all children and students to do well, regardless of background or gender. The key factors are sufficient resources and more qualified teachers with reasonable working loads. Thank you very much. And now I'm ready for questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Åsa, for your presentation. It's looking at all these numbers and concerns, it really makes you think, because for us it's these are similar challenges. So the question, the first question I have, it exactly relates to your argument that you are saying high workload and low salary is sort of key to answering or to solving potentially this problem. However, your numbers seem to show that it is a problem everywhere in Europe. Well, in some countries more, in others less, but overall, so would you then argue that the same problems are everywhere? I mean, from your own experience, or is this something there is yet another factor or a set of factors that really influence this? Because it sounds to me that probably there is quite a bit of variation in terms of salary, at least in different countries, but the issue still persists.
I would say, besides salary and workload, there's also the question of status, how high you value teachers in society. I think that makes a big difference. And I think perhaps the status issue and the wage issue makes a bigger difference when it comes to attracting male teachers than female teachers.
Okay. So now the status issue, though, is something that is obviously, in part related to salary, but also there is something maybe more fundamental to the status, something more deeper in the culture. Has the teacher's status always been relatively low in Sweden? Was it viewed sort of as some sort of, professional degree rather than really sort of a career where you can, grow and advance? Or, how do you decode this low status in Sweden? What are the sort of underlying reasons for this?
I think the teaching profession had a high status in Sweden if we go back in time, but there has been several changes in the school system that has decreased the status. One major event was when you moved the power of the education system from the national level over to the municipalities. And the municipality's major role before was to take care of children, to take care of the elderly. They were not used to have responsibility for the education system. So I think the appreciation of higher education was quite low in the municipalities who are the new are responsible for the school system.
Okay. Interesting, because we also, have I guess a similar model in the sense that the municipality actually deals with a lot of school-related issues and concerns. So maybe that's part of the answer. One thing that I wanted to clarify with you is this teacher's degree issue that you were saying. A number of teachers that are teaching right now don't have the qualification, and for males it's higher than for females. What is the system of hiring here? How come they come? Do they come with the commitment to get the degree, or what is the timeline for this if it is so? Please, could you explain a little bit more about this problem? Because I think for our listeners would be interesting to understand better, how this sort of hiring system works, because I think we also have a number of these sort of solutions to bring in more teachers into schools.
There are some solutions where you actually come in with the intention of getting a degree, and you can get a certain amount of time per week to actually study to get a degree. But I would say that that's not always the case. And it also has to do with the status, how you value a teacher education. Sometimes the discussion in Sweden has been more about more grown-ups in schools rather than more teachers in schools. It's more important that an adult is there supervising the children than a teacher teaching the students. So I think it's also a debate where we are trying to move it back to value education and quality in the education. And I think a key factor in this is that we can actually see that children from less advantaged homes with non-academic backgrounds, for example, they suffer more in this system. They suffer more in not having a qualified teacher in the classroom. So it is an increasing debate, since it's a widening knowledge gap within the Swedish student body.
Okay, but then so the system, do I get it right that the system is that you can basically come in? Do you have to have a bachelor's degree in order to start? You don't? Okay, so you don't have to even have a bachelor's degree. You just have to have a high school degree, or I guess. It's interesting. Please expand.
It sounds crazy when you ask questions like this, and it actually puts the finger on how crazy the system is. According to the regulations, they have to search for qualified teachers. But if they can't find any, they can actually take in whoever they want. And we also actually see that they don't try very hard to find qualified teachers. And that is a problem that we have raised, and we try to get a debate in society around that, because I think all parents want their children to have a teacher in the classroom rather than just anyone.
Okay. That's this anyone, it sounds a bit disturbing to me when you are describing that way. I hope it's not anyone. They have at least some process. Now one more thing that you were talking about is that male students, boys that they are in school, they have some behavioral issues or this kind of anti-study culture that is developing, and so you want to be cool and not to study and not to be a good student. Now the interesting part to me is this, from your point of view, is this something, I kind of recognize this as a more general trend, in Lithuania, it's also, we have these concerns, but then somehow I wonder, like, for example, Finland seems to kind of work things out, and kind of deal with this. Is the solution here simply, and I'm asking you now, as a professional, as a teacher also, is the solution here simply a male teacher, or is the solution somewhere sort of else to show that, study culture is, to have some role models that have studied, that are more maybe PhDs that would come in and say, listen, I have a great career, I work at a university, or I do this and that. So maybe more role models for career models, for them to show that this is the way to advance, in the future. And this is very sort of, the strategy that they are employing is very short term.
I think the question of role models is important. And of course, male teachers are one kind of role model. And as you said, to bring in like professors or PhDs to talk about the importance of education or the coolness of education for boys. But I also actually saw in this week, there was a Swedish famous football player who started a project where he urged children to read books, and he showed them that he read and what he reads to his children and so on. So I think we need male role models from both the academic side, but perhaps also from other sides of society. But role models is one thing. I also think that the way we teach, as I said, a more classroom-centered and more structured education seems to suit boys more. And I think that's one thing that we have to consider as well.
Okay. I also wanted to look a little bit to understand what is the system then, so let's say you graduate, you get into the into school as a teacher. What is happening next for teachers in terms of training, this lifelong learning? Do you have some sort of system that, you encourage this and somehow also provide a sense of growth for teachers? Because it seems like, this could be also part of the issue or part of the one element of the bigger picture that would help to retain the teachers who feel that they have a space for personal growth and in general for career growth.
It's a very good question, because it's an important thing, I think, for the teaching profession. And this is actually something that we lack in Sweden. Our members of our union, they describe that they don't have anything, almost anything, at least linked to their subject in order to further education. But now we actually have a decision in the parliament that says that they are going to bring forward a national professional program for teachers, where there are different steps to qualify, and you can have different directions. If I want to go further into my subject, to take a PhD, for example, or if I want to develop my methods, if I want to be a mentor for new teachers or for teacher students. So we really work hard for this program to come in action and to be a reality, because that's also a key to attracting more teachers.
Okay. The interesting part to me is also that, at least looking from the outside, the usual story about Sweden and in general Nordic countries, that unions are quite strong, in the Nordic countries. And so, teachers, one would suspect if unions are strong, teachers have a lot of leverage. How would you describe this level of leverage, that you have, when you approach politicians? To what extent you can actually, demand or even willing, I don't know, to protest and say, listen, this needs to be solved?
Oh, it's a hard question to ask a president of a union, but of course we want to affect more. But it's more linked to the status issue, and that is actually harder to put pressure, because what is status and how do we gain it back? So there are many different parts of this, and one thing that we have been working hard for is this national professional program for teachers. and that we have we're on our way to getting that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing with us all your sort of all your insights and.